Hello, everybody. Welcome to my channel on this rainy Sunday. Not really sure what to call this section, actually. It's a different video, but I had a brainstorm and I wanted to do it, and I had an idea about something that other people might be interested in. Maybe something about how old I am, maybe Gen X. Gen X! Stuff. I know a lot of people are doing videos about Gen X now, and I'm Gen X, being born when I was born. Or maybe it's just something about a movie, and if I want to watch it, or pop culture. Yeah. What's poppin'? I don't know. That or what the? Like, what the? I'm trying to think of names. Maybe you guys can help me. But I happened across this 4-hour Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny video experience. At least I think that's what it was called. I actually never watched it because I heard so many bad things. So many bad things. Well, and then, I believe Disney owns it, and that's a whole other story, right? But that some people talk about. And I thought, no, because I loved Indiana Jones. So what I wanted to do is do a bit of a wrap-up to the series and my story and my sort of ideas about what went on with it. Because I watched this guy, what was his name? Oh, it was really good. Anyway, and it was this 4-hour retrospective of Indiana Jones's career and life and what happened, and that crazy movie that everybody is like panned. Most people have panned it. It didn't make very much money in the box office, and it was sad because it was the swan song. It was the last Indiana Jones movie. And the fellow has so many interesting ideas, because you're thinking, how could anyone talk about that 4 hours? He did a brilliant job. Funny, extraordinary, poignant. Oh my God, it was amazing. And let's see if I can find what the name of it is. As you know, with my brain stuff. Let's see. Retro blasting. That was the name of it. It was called Retro Blasting. And it was like almost 4 hours, 3.5 hours, I don't know, something like that. And it was fantastic. And it talked in unbelievable detail about everything that was wrong with Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. And not just that, but that Indiana Jones in general and sort of the zeitgeist of it and the missed opportunities along the way. And I thought, that meant so much to me, very much like Star Wars meant the world to me. And then we watched it sort of, what do you even call it? Run into the ground, driven off a precipice, petering out in a pathetic way. Thank God they actually did fix it a little bit with the, the very last one. Still weird, though, if you think about how extraordinary those movies were to my generation in the 70s and 80s. And, of course, Indiana Jones, I believe it was 81. Don't quote me on this, everybody. But I believe it was 81 when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out. And it was so miraculous. We didn't have a lot of those kind of movies. They had them in the 60s and 70s, like Flash Gordon and some of the Westerns and, other kinds of science fiction-y movies. And of course, Star Wars had just come out. And again, Harrison Ford was in both of those. And that could be an entire video about how he ended up being in both of those. But he was in one, and then they liked him, and it was the same director, and George Lucas and all of that stuff, and Spielberg, and they were all together, which is how he ended up being in some of the most powerful movies of this generation, maybe any. And so to have this end in such a sad and pathetic way is super heartbreaking for a lot of people. So I wanted to just do a memory lane idea of what it was like for me, because I just watched his, and it was so brilliant about the whole ethos around Indiana Jones and how powerful that was in so many people's lives. And I thought, yeah, because I grew up with it too, in a way. It was like literally over a span of over 40 years. And they would take like a long time, to do all the movies. Let's see if we can find Indiana Jones dates. So when did they all come out? Right, we've got, okay, so here they are, everybody. Raiders of the Lost Ark was 1981. Temple of Doom was 1984, which is like 3 years, which is not that crazy of a thing, especially if it was a big sequel. Then we have The Last Crusade, which was 89, which was longer, because we got 85, 86, 87, 80, 89. That's almost 5 years. And then we have Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which is 2008, which is, 8 years? I think. 10 years, 11 years? No, I think it was 8, 9? Anyway, math isn't my jam. And I remember how powerful I thought that movie was. And then again, The Dial of Destiny in 2023. So 18 is 10 years. 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So like 15 years later. Yeah, it's like 15 years later. And you can tell it, given the situation. So I just want to talk about what it meant to me. And maybe you can think about what it meant to you if you're of a certain age. If you're younger, you're like, what's the big deal? Because you're not used to cinema that was like that. Because so much of the stuff out there now is very forgettable and really badly done. So egregious. You're like, how do you even watch that? But that's what they grew up with. Like, everybody knows different things. We had some cinema. Not only do we have cinema, we had amazing TV. Like, I know you're thinking TV, whatever. I feel the same way. I'm like, what am I even buying it for? They actually basically give it to you almost free now, but you have to spend so much money for the internet. At least where I shop, So I spend most of my time watching YouTube and making YouTube videos. Hence this movie that I'm making. And so, but there was some good stuff on, man. And TV was a real thing, and they put a lot of effort into it. And so those of us who remember that, like, have the huge nostalgia of movies. So that's kind of my thinking about it. So anyway, yes, there was all these movies. There's 5. And because Harrison Ford didn't want anybody else to play him, there won't ever be another one. Even though there could have been. Like in the James Bond movies, I believe 8 different people, maybe, have played him. And they all brought their own, ability, their own je ne sais quoi to it. Okay, everybody, favorite James Bond has to be... Oh my God. Well, I like Roger Moore, but I love the last guy whose name escapes me right now. Daniel Craig. Oh my God. Now that is James Bond right there for me. And so those are my 2 James Bonds. But yeah, they were amazing. They were an amazing series of movies. But he didn't want that, and neither did anybody else. They were like, no, we want it to be just him, which is a lost opportunity because other people could have taken it up, and they could have made very good money, and they also could have entertained people in a way, but they didn't end up doing that. So I think the first movie is just extraordinary. And you're like, wow, this is so different, and all the amazing things about, the Ark of the Covenant, and and how powerful it was, and how they go and find it, and Marianne Ravenwood, I think, is amazing. I love Karen Allen. I think she just was powerful. And it was kind of gross a little bit. I didn't love the super scary bug stuff, but still, it was such an amazing film and you couldn't take your eyes off him. If anybody remembers way back to 1981, it was so extraordinary. And Harrison Ford, had already been an amazing Han Solo and continued to be an amazing Han Solo. right up to the idea that he wanted to die in The Force Awakens, which is a whole other show, so I won't go into it, but I loved him. He was my absolute favorite character. And so, yeah, it's a very powerful kind of thing that they end up, meeting each other again, and then he meets Rey, and I love Rey, and, Rey reminds me so much of me in a lot of ways. We're both powerful. We both had awful upbringings. We don't know. We don't understand, what's going on. So he was in that, and then he comes and is Indiana Jones, and it's so fantastic, like life-changingly amazing. And then we get the nightmare that, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which apparently was not as much of a critical success. That broke my heart. I don't know about anybody else. That broke my heart. It was so gross. It was so heartbreaking. If those of you can remember, well, you were so excited. Remember, I was 16, and we were just wondering about what it was going to be, and then God, it was that. That blonde woman was rather annoying. Short Round was awesome, though. I mean, he was quite an amazing actor in his own right. So there was a lot to like about it, but the grossness was super over the top, and sort of the horror aspect was just, in my opinion, super over the top. But still, it was still interesting, and, it still had kind of an interesting ending, but you're still wondering, well, what's going to happen? What's going to go on? What's going to end up? And then, and then The Last Crusade comes, 89. Oh my God. I just adored it. I remember me and my friend watched it, and it was huge. It was a juggernaut. I remember getting this cup. I can't remember where I got the cup from, but they were doing all kinds of wonderful merchandise tie-ins at that point. And oh my God, I used that cup for so long, and it had a picture of him and his dad on it. I loved his dad. Not a big fan of Sean Connery in general, just because of his machismo sort of attitude towards people. But he was amazing in this movie. And it was so glorious. It really explained so much about his backstory and what happened, and, him when he was younger, and then why he didn't like the things that he didn't like, and how he was a professor, his dad was a professor. And it was just such a rollicking, extraordinarily beautiful kind of show. And then Walter Donovan, and he turns out to be this evil bugger, and you didn't know that, and, gosh, it was so the Holy Grail, and oh my God, it was so fantastic. Loved it, loved it, loved it. And then what's her name? What was her name? Elsa, Gilda, whatever. And then she turns out to be this evil cow, right? And you're like, you didn't know that. You didn't know she was going to be an evil cow. And then she is an evil cow, and then it's like, what's going on, man? What's going to happen? Then he rides off into the sunset. And then, and then they don't end up getting the Grail, which is just as well anyway, I think, because it falls down. He's like, Indy, and then he saves him because he's like, I can get it. And then a whole bunch of people already died. And then, so his dad ends up saving his life after he ends up saving his dad's life. And gosh, and then they ride off into the sunset. And you think that's the last movie. What a good end. And then, I don't know, somebody thought, let's do it in 2008 with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which was crazy, by the way. And then we find out he has a son, who I hated. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you don't like it. I'm sorry. This is my channel. And I despise that kid. Ew. But, I think he was all right. I don't think he was a bad actor in it. I didn't like his character. I liked Ox, though. I thought Ox was amazing. And I thought the Russian black-haired chick was scary. Well, she was scary. Russian black-haired chick. And then they were trying to find, this amazing crystal skull thing. And then there's all these different, it was just such a fun adventure. Kind of the way the first National Treasure was. I'm not even going to talk about the second one. Oh, my God. right? And I don't know what it is about sequels. So anyway, it was like that. It was just so exciting, and there was a puzzle, and you were trying to figure the puzzle out, and it was amazing. And for the first like 3/4 of the movie, it was just amazing. And then they go to this weird sort of surreal science fiction thing with all these weird aliens, and then did they actually meet the aliens? I'm not actually sure. They do end up having the crystal skull, and I know there is some kind of spaceship situation, and so that was still fun, though. It was still a fun kind of, and you're like, oh, well, that's still kind of a fun ending. Okay, now we're getting to this god-awful, egregious, horror filled bad dream that is the Dial of Destiny. And wow, that is just, it's pointless. There's no reason for it. And the saddest part is apparently Harrison Ford, you thought, yeah, he's a little cranky. Yeah, he doesn't really like his fans, but it's almost like he didn't have to like them because we liked him enough for both of us. You know, and he had this, you know, reputation for being difficult and not wanting to give interviews and not wanting to give the fans kind of any kind of friendly engagement. And, you know, in a way, some people thought it was cool. And you're like, oh, you know, he's kind of above all that. And we didn't care because we loved him so much anyway. But then you find out what an ugly person he actually is, which is heartbreaking. Because if you watch some of because I was watching this guy's big epic thing about Dial of Destiny, and he just hit it on the head. He just was like, yeah. And then you find out, you know, your childhood is messed up because you realize that this guy doesn't really like making these movies, thinks he's kind of above it all, thinks the people who love him are stupid, and, you know, doesn't really think he owes anybody anything. Like, people made you a star, buddy. You know, you didn't have to do that. People made you a star. You could have appreciated that. Like some people really do. You know, you could have appreciated that. That he's there for you. He works for you. You don't work for him, as plenty of people have found out lately in certain areas of endeavor and, you know, media. So, like, look, we don't have to buy it. We don't have to buy the things. We don't have to go, especially in this economy, right? So you find out that he wanted this sort of awful, pathetic, you know, egregious, broken kind of existence. He wanted Indy to be this broken-hearted guy, you know, in 1969. And it makes a really good point. He was always wealthy. You know, whether they spent the money, they didn't spend the money, they were wealthy. His dad was a professor in an era that not many people were professors. He was a professor for decades. That they make crazy good money. And not only that, he was also sort of an antiquarian, meaning he collected, you know, things and you know, finder's fees, and he was a treasure hunter. So he was wealthy. And then apparently they want us to believe now that the beautiful house he had in wherever it was, in the Midwest or wherever, he actually gave all that up to have a dingy, god-awful, dystopian tenement in 1969 with people who are too loud. And now he's this crotchety old man. And you're like, that is just so heartbroken. You know, he could have been anything. He could have done anything in this last movie, right? Because he had this spirit. He had this powerful spirit that he never did give up. Didn't matter what anything was happening, any stuff. He just kept going. And then he always fought for what was right. At least in the movies, we thought that he did. And apparently now, he just doesn't even do that anymore. And apparently the students in the university or the college that he now works at don't really care about him or about anything, whereas before they really did care about it. Mostly the women liked him, because I was one of those women when I was younger. The first movie came out, I think, when I was like 12 or 13. So I grew up with this man. I'm 56 now, right? Going to be 57. And so he was my prime of my life, right? For a lot of, and yeah, he was, my God, he was attractive. Not Kevin Costner attractive. That man is I don't know, man. He's like the most beautiful of people, I think. Well, if you got another one that's more beautiful, let me know in the comments. Because that is a good-looking man. Mm-hmm. Right? That's an attractive fella. So anyway, that's kind of what happens in this movie. It's sad, right? He's sad. Everything's sad. He's brokenhearted. He's sad. And then he's going to retire. And then all hell breaks loose. Get a kind of a brief overview. You've got this woman who has absolutely no business being there because it's 1969. But she's there and she's so out of place, and you're like, and then she doesn't even affect any change. You know, these people are murdered that he's worked with apparently for some time, although we don't really know, you know, why he's in New York at all. His son dies, you know, in this awful way, and then, like, that's sad. I mean, I didn't want the son to die. He had this beautiful marriage scene at the end of Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and it was so happy, and we're so happy for him, and now apparently it's this brokenhearted thing. Marion's brokenhearted, and, you know, he's brokenhearted. Their son died in the Vietnam War. God almighty. And not to make this, like, crazy long video, all this weird stuff happens that makes no sense. You know, apparently we're back to the Nazis, although this time, now it's like the post-World War era. It's like 20 years later or something, and they're still trying to get this thing called the Dial of Destiny, which is Archimedes' kind of time travel machine, who was a famous, like, Greek philosopher, mathematician, I think, fellow. And so there's this air, supposedly, of literary ability or science or, you know, all kinds of amazing academia, and yet it never comes out. Like, it's a very stupid, you know, it's stupid. And there's a line in this fellow's video, man, this is a stupid script. He says it like 5 times, and it's so true. It makes no sense. You know, either the people who wrote this movie never saw any other of the movies, or they just, you know, were playing free and loose with, you know, the storyline anyway, because it has to follow. It has a timeline, unless you're going to do an alternate timeline thing. We could talk about that later. There's a certain movie that did that, which was an okay movie. But it wasn't the Turtles. It was a different movie. But it was okay. I liked it. I didn't mind it. It just wasn't what it says it was. So, you know, you could have gone that way and maybe made it a different movie, but they didn't do that either. They're like, no, this is Indiana Jones. And then all this sort of stuff that made him, you know, his bullwhip, his hat, but it all didn't make sense anymore. And then this, like, awful woman, you know, and she was, you know, she basically, you know, took over the movie. And so it's this sort of sad story about how he's this brokenhearted man, and, you know, and you know, we don't understand why he, you know, wouldn't let the other guy, you know, destroy the Dial of Destiny, and then he kept it in the shelves at the archives of the college that he was presently at. So none of the stuff made any sense, and that the woman that was working with him, kind of, it didn't make any sense either, because she wasn't trying to help her dad or whatever. She just was this god-awful, you know, scam artist that was trying to steal it. And so we're like, oh my goodness. So it's like, it's bad. It's just bad. 2.5 hours later. And so it doesn't end up making any sense. They travel all this place, trying to get everything, try to do everything. And, you know, it makes no sense. There's this boy in there that he, you know, like, what is that boy there for? He doesn't seem to, like, he's not short round. He doesn't seem to have some point to it. So it's weird. And then all this weird stuff happens. And you're like, how does that even happen? And then he's like almost 80. How is any of this actually happening? And he really is 80 in the actual world, but he's like 70-something in the show. And so it just, yeah, it's just bad on so many fronts, you know. And, you know, she's not even, like, I think the woman, Kathleen Kennedy, wanted to make it like, you know, woman power, and I'm all for woman power because I grew up in the 70s, you know, Gloria Steinem and all that. This wasn't that either. She was just awful. She was just off-putting. she was just not anybody you'd want to, like, she was not appealing. And so all this stuff happens, and you can't get behind her at all, because, and there's no story, there's no plot. So it's like, what's going on here? And then, in the end, they end up going there in this really weird time travel thing, which makes absolutely no sense. Meeting the people from 2,000 years ago, meeting Archimedes, and then the whole thing was that they can't change history because this is sort of a point where it's unchangeable, which is an interesting philosophical conversation, should anybody want to. What if you do go in the future and it is unchangeable, like the new, very good, very well done Flash 2023, where he keeps trying to save his mother and he can't save her, and he realizes that if he does, it's just never going to work. So then oh my God, watch this movie, it's beautiful. So that was a thing of beauty. And so all that stuff, right? And so in the end, she ends up hitting him at the end of the movie because he doesn't want to leave, ancient Greece, because he's like, he has nothing to go home to. And it's like, well, whose fault is that? Really? And then it's this stupid ending where, he wakes up. You have no idea how they get back from like 2,000 years ago because the plane that brought them is now gone. So, they're apparently this kid, whatever, is now going to, fly something. And we never know, actually. We don't find out. And so anyway, you wake up, and then poor Salah, what they did to him, it was just, I won't even mention it. It's so bad. And he was his beautiful friend in Egypt, I believe. And then, wow, they were not kind to him. And so they all end up coming. He wakes up now from this like coma because he was shot, which I forgot to mention. And then he wakes up now, and it's this sort of denouement thing, which is French for the end of stuff. English teacher. And, and then all of a sudden Marion shows up, and she was apparently supposed to be in the movie originally, and then they changed the script all up, and now she isn't, which I think would have been so much better if she could have been there, and or they could have talked about their life and what happened. And then they, have this really tacky sort of knockoff from Raiders of the Lost Ark in this scene where they have this big romantic scene about, where don't you hurt? And and then that's kind of the end of the movie in a way. So that's the end of the five, movie series. And you're like, dude, man, Indiana Jones deserved a better end than that. So if it was me, what would I say? I would say him and Marion are still in love, absolutely. Their son is happy. They have grandkids now, and maybe the grandkids learn about their dad and their grandpa and all the fun things that they did. Gonna cry. And maybe Marion gets more to do. And maybe they have a daughter, and who knows, maybe the daughter is gonna follow in Indiana Jones' footsteps. Right? Which does set up, sequels. Man, that's a better end. That's a better end. And they're sitting on their beautiful porch, looking at the sun, thinking about all their beautiful times together. The end. That would have been a better end, right? That would have been a better end for Indy, and maybe, his little granddaughter puts the hat on. And then he's like, dun-da-da, dun-da-da, dun-da-da. Dun, da, 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 da. So, something like that would have been such a much better ending or whatever. So that's what I wanted to say, everybody, in this very powerful, brand new edition of my channel. Yes. So we'll see you again